We also have a really packed and amazing fall schedule. So for that, you can check out the meetings page on our website, which I will drop in the chat after I'm done speaking. But it's that first link above. We have one of the exciting events we've got coming up is if you're in Northeast Ohio or feel like traveling to Northeast Ohio on October 11th, we are going to do a tour through Cuyahoga Valley on the Cuyahoga Valley Scenic Railroad. So we're actually going to get on a train in addition to having other meetings that we've got throughout the state. But we've got chapter meetings in Cleveland, Cincinnati, and Columbus coming up. And we've got other chapters that we're launching as well. So if you go and check out our meetings and events page, you will see that information there. And then we'll get into this a little bit as well, but one of our probably our most important call to action for today is to register for the Ohio Rail Development Commission bi-monthly meeting, which is going to be on this Thursday at 11 a.m. If you are in person in Columbus and can attend in person, we would highly encourage that. If you can't, it is live streamed over GoToWebinar, and you can go on their website and register to attend the stream. The important part about attending the stream is at the end, there is time to leave public comment. And this commission is one that doesn't get a ton of engagement from the public in terms of attendance at these meetings. And right now, as Ken is going to talk about, there is a lot of eyes on passenger rail and what that means for the future of the state of Ohio. So the more advocates and members of the public that we have at those meetings leaving comment, the better. And I would also really encourage you to go to the ORDC's website and poke around it. All of the meetings are public information, the documents are public information, the agenda is public information, the commissioners are public information. And if you really go through a deep dive, understand who the commissioners are, who they represent, what these documents say, what they'll be reviewing, it is important to have eyes on that body. So we would really encourage you, and I'll drop the link in the chat as well, to register for that meeting on Thursday morning. And then lastly, we have a Slack channel. So you can scan this QR code, join us on Slack. We have a lot of great conversations there. But I don't want to take up too much time because we have so many good things to talk about. So I want to introduce Ken Sislak, who is going to be speaking today on the State Rail Plan. Ken is a treasured member of this community and a longstanding member of this community, and he's been an enormous asset to all about Ohio for years. He has over 50 years in the business, and he's been a consultant for over 30 years. He's currently, one of his many titles is the vice president of AECOM. Ken has written or reviewed and critiqued passenger rail sections of the state rail plans in North Carolina, South Carolina, Mississippi, Pennsylvania, and Connecticut. He was the project manager for California's State Rail Plan, as well as the project principal for the New Mexico State Rail Plan. So with that, if we could give Ken a warm welcome, and Ken, I will turn it over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Lisa, for that very kind introduction. The Ohio State Rail Plan is the guiding document for Ohio's investment programs and plans for the future for Ohio. The Ohio Rail Plan is a federal requirement. It was the subject of the Passenger Rail Investment Improvement Act of 2008, which directed the FRA to have state rail plans so that the federal government knew what kind of projects were in their pipelines for future federal funding asks. Guidance was issued in 2013, and that guidance has not been amended since then. You can see on the screen there's a very prescriptive way to write state rail plans. It follows that table of contents, and the Ohio State Rail Plan follows that very dutifully. What it does is provides a snapshot of the current rail system. It provides an inventory and description of the existing rail system, including the Class 1 railroads, their commodity flows, the Class 2 and Class 3 railroads, short lines, And it talks briefly about Ohio's tourist railroad industry, which I'm familiar with, being a board member of the Cuyahoga Valley Scenic Railroad, which is pictured in my as my background. It also is supposed to talk about proposed passenger rail improvements, and I think this is the subject of our discussion today. The program also links to Access Ohio, which is the state transportation plan, which includes the vision, investment priorities, and the coordination strategies among all the modal elements of Ohio's transportation network. Obviously, the Ohio Rail Development Commission is the principal author of this, and they've been assisted by the consulting firm WSP in preparing the document itself. So what's in the plan? It really details, it shows details about what's in the state in terms of rail infrastructure. Today, there's over 5,000 miles of active rail lines in Ohio, and it ranks fourth in the U.S. for total rail mileage. 86 of the 88 counties are served by rail in some way, shape, or form, either by a Class 1 or one of the short lines. The rail plan is primarily freight focused, and you'll see why in a minute. The railroads that serve Ohio are the Class 1 CSX, Norfolk Southern, and CN, Canadian National. And of course, the regional and short line railroads owned by others. Amtrak operates over 376 miles, but like in most other states, it operates on the freight-owned railroad tracks. So it does not own any tracks of its own in Ohio, unlike Michigan, where it owns about 100 miles of track up in Michigan, where the trains now travel at 110 miles an hour. So this is the rail mileage by type of railroad. This is a snapshot that's taken right out of the rail plan, so you can see that the bulk of the system is the Class 1 railroads that crisscross the state, east-west and north-south. There are 668 miles of Class 2 and 1,500 miles of Class 3. And yes, there are 61 miles of tourist excursion railroads, and our railroad, the Cuyahoga Valley Scenic Railroad, is 30 miles of that 61. So half of the mileage in Ohio is operated by the Cuyahoga Valley Scenic Railroad on the tourist side of things. So that adds up to the 5,000 miles. So what's missing from the state rail plan? They followed, the state rail plan has followed religiously the content outline required by the FRA in their guidance. And part of that is to look at the economics of rail in the state as part of the understanding of what the impact of rail is in Ohio. And if you look carefully, you can see that passenger rail has a very, very small total impact on Ohio in terms of its total value, in terms of economic activity. It's about 48.4 million versus $4.3 billion worth of total economic impact. So it has a very small impact, and that is why the state rail plan concentrates on freight and not passenger, because the passenger system is a very, very, very small, it has a very small impact on Ohio in terms of employment and earnings and everything else. So that's one of the reasons why you see a very heavy influence or emphasis on freight in the state rail plan, because it's important to the state's economy. So let's look at the passenger rail context that is in the report. We know that passenger rail has a very small share of Ohio's travel demand. Well, yes, that's correct. I remember when I was on the Governor's Blue Ribbon Commission when Governor Strickland was the governor. The Ohio Department of Transportation made a comment that says, "Oh, overwhelmingly people choose to ride the car, and passenger rail is very small." And I raised my hand and I said, the reason why people choose the car is because they have no other choice. And if we had more choices, we can shift the demand, and we can see that in other states where they do have a very robust state-supported passenger rail system, such as California, for example, or Michigan or Illinois or New York. So where you provide the service and it's frequent and reliable, people will choose to ride it. So passenger rail, there's 134,000 people annually utilizing Amtrak in Ohio. And that's a remarkable number considering that all the trains that pass through Ohio pass through the dead of night at zero dark 30 hours, as they would say. So it's remarkable that people will show up to catch a train at 2 o'clock in the morning. And for a train that is habitually late. And we'll talk about that in a moment. Ohio only has 7 Amtrak stations, but they serve major cities: Cleveland, Cincinnati, Toledo, Elyria, Sandusky, Alliance, and Bryan are the stations in Ohio. And Ohio is served by those 3 trains that come here in the middle of the night: the Lakeshore Limited, which connects Boston and New York to Chicago via Cleveland; the Floridian, which was formerly the Capital Limited, which was connected to the Silver Star, so it's become the New Floridian. It runs Chicago to Washington, D.C. to Miami, Florida, and the Cardinal, which we know serves Cincinnati, but only 3 times a week in the dead of night. This slide shows the routes, and it shows the stations, and shows the usage of that station. That's both ons and offs. We count ons and offs in passenger rail simply because what we find important is that it's the usage of the station. People get on the train, they get off the train. So those are people that are using the station, and obviously at the same time, because when a train arrives, people get off and other people get on. So the usage in public transit, we only count the people who get on the train because that is an indication of demand. But in passenger rail, we count them both because that's an indication of usage of the system. The Ohio Rail Plan talks about the corridor ID projects, and the ones that are in the plan are the 2 that ORDC sponsored, which is the Cleveland, Columbus, Dayton, or the 3C+D corridor; the Cleveland, Toledo, Detroit, which is for me the legacy, the Mercury that was operated by the New York Central Railroad back when I was a boy. The Fort Wayne and Morpsey are working on the Midwest Connect project, which is Chicago, Fort Wayne, Columbus, Pittsburgh. And Amtrak has a corridor ID project, take the Cardinal from 3 times a week to a daily service. And that serves New York City, Chicago via Cincinnati, as we know. So those are the corridor ID projects. What did not get into the program were 3 corridor ID program or projects that were sponsored by NOACA. One was for Chicago to Cleveland, the other one was Cleveland to Buffalo, and then the other one, Cleveland to Pittsburgh. Why are they important? Because the other states, some of our neighboring states, and the Amtrak Connect US program wants to extend the Empire service out of New York from Buffalo to Cleveland, and Pennsylvania has an interest in extending the Pennsylvanian from Pittsburgh to Cleveland. That's also in the Amtrak US plan. And the reason for that is there are a lot of people that travel between Buffalo and Cleveland and Pittsburgh. In fact, before they built the Ohio Turnpike, there were 20 trains a day going between Cleveland and Pittsburgh. And I can tell you that the day before Amtrak started, there were 6 trains a day going between Buffalo and Cleveland on the New York Central, or what by then was Conrail. So there was a lot of service still remaining on the northern tier of the passenger rail network that is operated by the Lakeshore Limited today. Those did not get into the corridor ID program because ORDC did not sign a letter of support for them, even though we got letters of support from both senators, who at the time was Sherrod Brown and J.D. Vance, who's now vice president, obviously. So those are programs that did not make it in, and therefore are not considered and not even included or talked about in the current state rail plan. So let's talk about the passenger rail studies that have gone on and have caught the interest of people and made it into the state rail plan as a indicator of what's been going on in terms of planning for passenger rail. The Amtrak Connects US Vision, which was issued in 2021 by Amtrak, talks about 39 new routes and 25 upgrades nationally. And it included the 3C plus D and the Cleveland Toledo Detroit project, which is the subject of the ORDC Corridor ID program. So if you look at the Connect US vision that Amtrak had, Ohio was well served. Not the FRA Midwest Regional Rail Plan took a different tack. It was looking at high performance linkages, and Chicago Columbus had a high performance link that linked over to Indianapolis. So it went, I think, Chicago to Indianapolis to Columbus with a high speed rail link. But unfortunately, it was just a planning study, and there is no link between Columbus and Indianapolis by rail anymore. That linkage has been taken up, so it would have to be built new. The other interesting thing about the FRA Midwest Regional Rail Plan is that it looked at a 110-mile-an-hour service between Fort Wayne and Cleveland, and a higher speed or high speed line from Fort Wayne to Chicago on the denser linkage of the network. The 3C and D did not make it into the FRA Midwest Regional Rail Plan. Midwest Connect did not make it into the Midwest Regional Rail Plan. And there are reasons for that, probably. I don't know what they are, but the Midwest Regional Rail Study really looked at the 3C plus D corridor as sort of a future emerging corridor. It's a dotted line on the map, and they really didn't give it much credence, unlike the Amtrak US study that said that's a high demand route. As a sidebar conversation, I worked on a high-speed rail strategic plan for a client that has to remain confidential. But when we looked at the potential corridors in the United States that looked like it would be ripe for high-speed rail, the 3C and D corridor popped out as one of the top 20 markets in the United States. Now remember, the top market in the United States is the Northeast Corridor, and number 2 was Los Angeles to San Francisco. Number 3 was Dallas, Houston. Number 4 was the Cascadia. So you can see that we were in the top 20, probably around number 15 or therefore, but we didn't make it into the Midwest Regional Rail Plan. We'll have to ask ORDC why someday when we have a chance. The FRA Amtrak Long Distance Service Study was also completed in 2025. I was lucky enough to participate as one of the planners that convened and managed the route analysis, if you will, that looked at where we should add Amtrak long distance service. At the end of the day, we added 15 routes that we suggested that the Congress consider adding to the network, the existing long distance network. And 2 of those routes come through Ohio. Originally, I was hoping that it would be Cleveland, Columbus, Cincinnati to New Orleans, because I wanted to take the train to go to the Mardi Gras. But the demand analysis showed that Detroit, which is a much larger market, would be the better anchor for that route. So that Detroit to New Orleans service would then connect Toledo, Columbus, and Cincinnati. The other route is we wanted to have a long distance route that connected New York City to Dallas. And so when we looked at the route structure for that, it ran through the route of the Pennsylvanian over to Pittsburgh, and then took the route of the former National Limited to Columbus. It has to go to Cincinnati now because the route over to Indianapolis has been cut. So you have to move the trains down to Dayton and Cincinnati over to Indianapolis, and then on to St. Louis and to Dallas. So those are important passenger rail studies, and they've been mentioned in the state rail plan as studies that of interest. And my computer froze right now. Oh, there we go. So what are some of the gaps in the state rail plan from terms of passenger services? Obviously, the plan is very freight heavy. And the funding of the projects prioritize freight. And you saw the reason why. Freight is $4.8 billion of annual economic impact, and passenger rail is 48 million. So that's why the plan is very heavy freight, because Ohio industry, Ohio agriculture depends on moving that freight in and out of the state and other places. The passenger sections emphasize studies and planning. There are no projects that are listed in there that are implementable because they don't know what they are yet. They're still in step one of the corridor ID program, which is the putting together a scope, schedule, and budget to prepare a service development plan. And the service development plan, as you recall from another All Aboard Ohio meeting we gave, talks about what goes into a service development plan, and that's where you identify what the market is, what the demand for services are, where there needs to be improvements in order to make sure that you don't have a negative impact on the freight system, to minimize those impacts, to make sure that the freight trains are moving with fluidity over their networks. We don't know any of those. We don't know any of those projects yet. So that's why the state rail plan is silent on what projects are needed for implementation, because they don't know what they are yet until the service development plan is complete. And those service development plans won't be complete for several years down the road because they haven't been funded by the federal government yet. We're still stuck. Everybody, there are 69 projects that were approved into the corridor ID program. 61 of those projects are stuck in step one because the funding right now has been frozen. We expect the logjam to break here. We've been told the logjam will be broken probably in October. So we're hoping and praying that the logjam will be broken and we'll begin getting the funding and start doing the service development planning later this year or early next year, 2026. Those plans usually take a couple of years to complete. So in order for us to know what's needed to be placed into a state rail plan for project improvement, we won't know for a couple of years yet. So the next state rail plan, the one that comes out 4 years from now, will probably have those plans and programs articulated. But what is really telling about the state rail plan is that there is no funding. There's no state funding for rail in passenger rail in Ohio. All the funding for passenger projects is dependent on federal grants. And as we know from our last go around, even the local share for service development planning, which is 10% of the estimated budget for the service development plans, was not identified as a line item in the budget. So we are, it's unknown as to whether or not step two is funded. We believe it is under the ORDC's general budget, but we'll find out soon enough. And there's no near-term state-led commitments for operating. I mean, you can have a service development plan. At the end of the day, there's a governance section where you have to articulate how are you going to pay for operations and maintenance of this thing over the years after the federal grants run out that help you get the program or the operation started. So there has been no identification of any state support or commitments for funding for operations. We're totally dependent on federal handouts. During the process of preparing a state rail plan, there has to be a lot of community engagement and stakeholder and public input. And they did that. They did that, I think, good enough. I certainly participated and sent in my comments and filled out the questionnaires. The result of that was there's a very strong support in the state for the 3C plus D corridor. Remember that over half, nearly 60% of all the population, that's 11 million people in Ohio that live here, 60% of that, or so over 6 million people, live within 50 miles of a station along the 3C and D corridor. That's pretty significant. And then if you do the planning correctly for the 3C and D corridor with throughway bus services that connect outlying areas that are not near stations, but let's say, for example, Athens, Ohio, in Southeast Ohio, if you connect it to Columbus with a throughway bus, and other areas of Ohio that can be connected by bus to a rail station as part of that network, you can get almost all of the counties and all of the people within 50 miles served by those trains. There's interest in the Midwest Connect project and the Cleveland, Toledo, Detroit project as well. They have strong support and they have their constituencies and their support for that. The public priorities are pretty much mirror what the governor's demand is, if you will. The passenger rail has to be car competitive. The 3C and D corridor failed the last time because Amtrak issued some feasibility study that showed that the average speed of the train would be like 39 miles per hour. Well, I can tell you that the average speed of an Amtrak train over their entire network is about 49 miles per hour. And why? Because while they're going 80 miles an hour most of the time, they come to a station, they have to stop. They have to take let people off, put people on, that adds time. And so the average speed of that line is probably around 49. Well, it caught on. Kasich during his campaign called it, well, this is not high-speed rail, this is snail rail. And that stuck, and the snail rail moniker stuck to it, and it did not receive the support from the new governor coming in that it should have. And Mr. Kasich gave the $400 million away, and most of that money went to Michigan to improve their rail system, which is now running at 110 miles an hour. They also have new trains as well with part of the Midwest joint procurement. So it has to be car competitive. We also need to have convenient schedules and connections. In other words, the trains need to run frequently at times that people want to use them. So even a minimum schedule, you need to have a morning train, an afternoon train, and an evening train in both directions to make it convenient for most people. So convenient schedules and connections so that the connections can be made at stations where you can continue on to a different location is important. What they also ask for in the public priorities is better multimodal stations in Cleveland and Cincinnati. Cleveland in particular is ripe for a new station. Cincinnati has a beautiful station, but to catch the Amtrak train is just a ghost of its former self to go down and catch a train in Cincinnati. What I found fascinating in looking at the state rail plan is that it only talks about making ADA improvements to the existing stations. It failed to recognize that Toledo put in a grant application for a federal-state partnership to improve its station, its infrastructure, its HVAC, to add more platforms in anticipation of more service coming through Toledo, and in particular so that trains going in opposite directions can pull into Toledo without occupying the same track. You have that problem in Sandusky, for instance. If you look at the Amtrak schedule, you have an eastbound and a westbound train arriving in Sandusky at the same time, but there's only one platform in Sandusky to board people. And you can't do that. So one train has to sit out on the main line while the other train is just, having people alight and board. And then when that train departs, it has to cross over to pass the train that's waiting to enter the station. And what that does is that adds congestion and delay to all the freight trains that are piled up behind these passenger trains. Remember that the passenger train's average speed is about 50 miles an hour. The average speed of a freight train is 25 miles an hour. An intermodal train can be running at 65, but it gets stuck along the way for signals. And so the average speed of these things are slower than passenger trains. And the faster passenger trains consume a lot of capacity. And that's one of the other reasons why freight railroads are reluctant to entertain additional services on their freight-owned lines. So there's ways in which state rail plans can address that, but you need to know what the infrastructure impacts are of adding trains to the network and what that impact is to the freight trains and what kind of programs and projects are needed to alleviate and mitigate those capacity constraints. We've heard now from Akron and Canton that they are saddened that they are not on anybody's network. In a recent news article, the Congresswoman from Akron wrote a letter to the governor saying, I don't see Akron Canton in the state rail plan. And uh, uh, Mr. Dietrich responded, probably correctly, saying, when we do the service development planning, we'll probably have to look at multiple route opportunities and alternatives and figure out which is the best route alternative. But he cited the prior studies done for the 3C plus D corridor during the Strickland administration, when Akron Canton was looked at as a possible route option, and it was dismissed because it just added too much travel time between Cleveland and Columbus, which then no longer made Cleveland to Columbus a car competitive travel time. I can tell you that the Akron state representatives are are pushing for an Akron Canton service to connect to Cleveland. That's more of a commuter train, and there's opportunities to look at that. That can also be included in the state rail plan as an opportunity, and these kinds of things I think should be added to the state rail plan. So what does this really mean for us here in Ohio? The plan shows passenger rail interest, but there's a limited commitment being expressed in writing by the state in the rail plan itself. We recognize that Ohio has been included in several federal planning programs. We certainly have 4 corridors in the Corridor ID program, which I talked about earlier: 3C plus D, Detroit, Toledo, Cleveland, the Midwest Connect going through Columbus, and the Daily Cardinal serving Cincinnati. We know that Amtrak Connect's U.S. Plan and vision had a broad view of things, but the Midwest Regional Rail Plan did not. The Midwest Regional Plan was almost silent about Ohio, just connecting Cleveland to Chicago via a higher speed train via Fort Wayne, and a higher speed connection between Columbus and Indianapolis. But the 3C and D was a dotted line, is sort of an afterthought. So what does this really mean? It means that state leadership needs to attend meetings. We need to rejoin MIPRIC so that we are at the table, and funding is critical. State funding is especially important because all of these federal grants require local match. State funding is critical for that. State partnership is critical for that. It's called a federal state partnership for a reason under law, because what they're looking at the national level is the kind of a program that got the interstate highway system up and running. And that was a partnership between the federal government and the state DOTs. And so what they're trying to do is create that same kind of level of partnership between the FRA and state DOTs. So what are the opportunities for All Aboard Ohio? It's really about visibility. It's keeping passenger rail visible in policy deliberations at the State House. It's knocking on doors and calling on our state representatives and congressional delegation to make sure that Ohio is coming to the table with a program of plans to actually implement passenger rail as an improvement over what we have today, to provide people with opportunity, to provide people with choice, to provide people with with the economic development opportunities that come with station area development. Funding, funding, funding. It's all about the money. If you don't have any state matching funds, you get no federal grants. It's as simple as that. Ensure stations and stations is important. It's a community focus. The stations need to reflect the community needs, and it needs to be developed in such a way as to spur economic development near those stations. And freight. I mean, we need to support our freight railroads because they host all the passenger trains that operate through the state. But we need to communicate how passenger rail can help freight operate more fluidly. If you look at the congestion on the route that goes across northern Ohio, that has the densest freight movement in the country, except out of some of the routes that come out of the ports out of Southern California. If you look at the maps, the thematic maps that are in the state rail plan, you'll see that the Norfolk Southern Main Line, the former New York Central, and then the branching off from Cleveland, the old Pennsylvania Railroad main line between Cleveland and Pittsburgh, are the heaviest use freight railroads in the state. There's a lot of congestion out there, and it's one of the causes for delays of the freight trains. The freight trains are delayed by passenger trains because when passenger trains have to stop at only one passenger boarding area, and on the main line, no less, all the freight trains behind it stack up. So by adding passenger platforms on both sides of the track, so that you don't have the nightly miracle that occurs with dispatchers making sure that everything moves. I think there's an opportunity here for making investments in passenger rail at stations that will help the freight move more fluidly. And once you get the freight railroads involved and they understand and see the benefit to them, they will be a little more conducive to supporting what we are trying to accomplish and help us along the way. At the national level, I can tell you that the freight railroads, when Doge was going through and making all the cuts to various programs, I think the freight railroads came up and basically said, we want you to leave the Chrissy grants and other grants like that alone because it's important to us. So, and a lot of those Chrissy grants are for passenger rail improvements that come out of state rail planning efforts, and they see how that benefits them. I want to leave you with a lasting image, with one image before I close my remarks. This is the passenger rail station in Bloomington Normal, Illinois. The station is on the lower level. The upper level is the city hall and the council chambers. You can see that it's multimodal. There's a parking garage that serves their downtown. There have been all kinds of commercial development that has occurred around the station. And why is this important? Because there's a lot of Illinois has invested in passenger rail. They support the program, and the number of passenger trains that come to Bloomington Normal is frequent, reliable service that connects Bloomington Normal to Chicago. But do passenger trains make a difference to a community? Yes, they can, and here's living proof of it. So that concludes my remarks, and I'll turn it over to Lisa to organize our questions and answers if you have any. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you so much, Ken. I appreciate that. That was a wonderful presentation. So if anybody has questions, please feel free to throw them in the chat. Okay. Jessica, go ahead.
Jessica, you're on mute. Unmute yourself.
I'll unmute you if you can't.
Well, first of all, which Illinois city was that? It wasn't Chicago, but it was connected with Chicago.
Bloomington Normal.
Bloomington North. Okay, that's what it's called.
It's in Illinois. It's where the University of Illinois is.
Oh, okay. What would you say about 60% of people in Ohio live within
Within 50 miles of a station on the 3C and D.
15 miles of 15 miles of
50.
50 miles of a station on 3C and D?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Okay.
Does that answer your question, Jessica?
Well, I just realized, I don't know if you have anything more to say about the action steps. I got this email from somebody from ODOT, Wendy is the first name maybe, saying thank you for participating in the state rail plan. And now I look back and I went to my email and I was something on September 2nd about the state rail plan. And now it seems like the comment period has closed except for attending the meeting. I mean, are you still able to send them emails? How does that work?
I'm going to guess you're talking about Wendy from ORDC. So, yeah, so she's the secretary there. They're voting on the draft state rail plan on Thursday at the ORDC meeting. I put the links for both the draft state rail plan as well as the registration for that meeting on Thursday. So you can check out more there.
I realized that you did send out a press release about the plan like September 2nd. And I got an email from her that had the draft that said, thank you for participating. And I didn't remember if I had or not, but you can't send comments now between now and Thursday.
You can add a public comment at the meeting, on the meeting itself, but not on the state rail plan. But I'm happy to chat with you about that a little more and clear that up so we can move to the next question. Okay. Thanks, Jessica. Glenn.
Yeah, thanks for your report, Ken. It was very insightful. I'm kind of a more of a proponent though of the Cleveland to Toledo to Detroit thing for the following reasons. One, over the last 2 years, Toledo has wound up being 1.5 to 2 percentage points higher than the national average on unemployment. We found the shedding of our population in the last 2 years to 5,000 people. And so that's kind of taking a hit on our tax base. And I think that by promoting the Cleveland to Toledo to Detroit corridor would actually make a better economic boost to the area, because one, the upgrade is a little bit cheaper, and two, Apple has just invested is planning to invest $100 billion into their AI emphasis. They have an AI program up in Detroit, and Bowling Green, which is 30 minutes south of Toledo, has opened up a university degree program. So having that to complement the Detroit program actually would make this a better bang for the buck on rail development in here. But you're absolutely right on the statewide, I wouldn't say ignorance, but I would say probably just kind of forgetting about the use of passenger rail in economic development.
Yeah, absolutely. Completely agree with that, Glenn. All really good points. That Cleveland, Toledo, Detroit route is so great for that. I think I want to get back to some of the comments that were in the chat just to have a little discussion on those. One of the things that has come up is flights. And so when we talk about the various rail plans in Ohio, particularly when you think about Cleveland, Toledo, Detroit, opening up better flight service for places like Toledo and Sandusky would be a big benefit, because you got Detroit Airport on one end and Cleveland Airport on the other end. So these cities that don't have any flight service or only have minimal flight service would benefit from that. So that's a great discussion in the chat. Another discussion in the chat is, hey, yes, the state is not the only entity that can participate in the Federal Railroad Administration's corridor ID process. And so having the regional planning organizations such as NOACA be part of that is an opportunity and a possibility. Tamagog in Northwest Ohio has expressed a lot of interest in that. There still needs to be some level of partnership for the state, and that's what a lot of our advocacy is. And then that gets into the third point from the chat that I want to make, and I'm hoping Lisa can make some comments, and there's been some reactions in the chat. But a lot of people are asking, hey, what if I participate in the ORDC discussion on Thursday, what specifically should I be asking for? Right. And so maybe Lisa, you can make some comments on that, and what are we asking advocates to ask for?
Yes, thank you. And for reference, I also dropped AAO's advocacy toolkit in the chat. This is a developing document, and we will have some more information in it before Thursday, but it tells you varying advocacy actions you can take, whether it's calling, sending emails, and who the various government organizations or bodies are to reach out to. But to answer Brian's question about Thursday, one thing that I keep coming back to, and we've heard repeatedly in the meetings, is that So one thing that came up in the last meeting is one of the commissioners had said, and I forget exactly who it was, that like it's just us advocates showing up. It's not like, despite all this data, that it's not the general public that wants this. It's just advocates showing up. So I think the more, and we actually do have a lot of data and facts on how this has such broad public support. ODOT, in their latest long-term planning study that they conducted, they're in the process of doing right now, but they conducted a study last year that was statistically significant of the population of Ohio, including responses from every county, and they emphasized that, showed what over 75% of Ohioans want passenger rail, and they want it as a strong priority for long-term planning. So I think the more that we can come to these meetings, let them know that we are members of the public and that there is a demand here, which also means showing up in volume and presenting these facts and presenting this data and doing it repeatedly is really important. And why I'm emphasizing attending these meetings just goes so far, because the more eyes that are on these conversations and that are on these commissioners shows that the public is holding them accountable and that these conversations we're listening to. So I would just keep showing up, keep expressing your support, and also sharing your individual stories. Telling them where you live, telling them how you travel, telling them how you would like to travel. Where are your friends and family? The ORDC meeting isn't necessarily always the best place for that, but I do think it's important to say, hey, my grandkids go to school at Ohio State. I live in Cleveland and I visit them 3 times a year. I would love to take the train to do that. Stories like that actually show the use case and make it a bit more real. So long story short, express support for passenger rail, period. Let them know that you are informed about Corridor ID, that you know about these projects, and this is not an abstract concept, and then share your individual stories with them and your state representatives.
One of the points John Esterly made was that the ORDC room holds about 90 people, and there are usually nowhere near that amount, and it would be great to do a lot to fill it up. So if you're wondering if there's going to be room for you, I can all but assure you there would be room for you in that room. So folks that are in Columbus and have the time available during the weekday to participate would be much appreciated.
Yes. Okay, Brian, any other questions you're seeing in the chat that we haven't addressed yet? Ken, any other points you want to make based on this last conversation? Okay. I'm seeing some good data.
Yeah, and I think to the point, for those of you, if you don't have the chat open, I would encourage you to pop that chat open. Ryan has posted quite a few pieces of information that would help as you're having conversations, direct links to the study showing the very large percentage of Ohioans who are pushing for more more passenger rail service. Great question just came up in the chat from John. Yes, fortunately, I did remember to click the record button at the beginning of this, so we'll get that cleaned up a little bit and get that posted on our YouTube channel later this week, and then you would be able to share that with others. It was wonderful to see the participation. I think we topped out at about 48, which is one of our larger ones of these. We really appreciate all of the interest, and of course, that also means there were a lot of people that expressed interest that just weren't available to join us. So we'll make sure that they get a copy of the recording as well.
Yeah, and I also dropped the link in the chat. Someone can just let me know if that's working. But we have a spreadsheet of all the state reps in Ohio on both the House and the Senate side that has their contact information, clearer information on their district, as well as if any stops on any of the proposed corridor ID routes or current stops are in their district. So again, if you reach out and you say hello to your senator, I know that this stop is in your district and this matters to me because I would take it. Again, the more of that concrete information you have, it's really important. So take a look at all the resources on our website. Double check our events page. We have a lot of good events coming up. Keep an eye on the advocacy toolkit. And also don't hesitate to reach out to any of us on the board or staff at All Aboard Ohio. If you have questions, ideas, comments, concerns, or need information, we're really working to put out more accessible tools and information to empower everyone to take the advocacy actions that they need on their own, and keep everybody informed about where things stand. So we really do welcome the feedback and input on what it is that you need. And we also, go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, Tom just asked a great question in the chat that I want to chat a little bit about. Like, hey, do we know where reps and senators stand on passenger rail? I think that's a great question. As you are reaching out to your elected officials, that's a great place to stand. But I think one of the things I really want to emphasize and remind people of is that in the House of Representatives, the Transportation Committee chair is Representative Bernie Willis, and the vice chair is Jack Daniels from Akron. Both of them attended the AAO annual meeting. So that's the first time, at least in recent memory, that we've had elected officials participate, and both of them are very positive on passenger rail support. So I would characterize it as overall, we have strong support in the Ohio House of Representatives across the political spectrum. In the Senate, it's a little bit more mixed. So we need, as you're reaching out to your elected officials in the Senate, I mean, there are some Republican senators that are supportive of this, Ohio state senators, and others that are less so. And so as you're reaching out, make sure that you make it clear that this is important to you. We are working on supporting efforts, particularly within the House, to introduce legislation to have Ohio rejoin the Midwest Interstate Passenger Rail Commission as a standalone bill. And we believe there's strong support in the House, but it's probably going to take some work to get it done in the Senate. So thank you very much for that question. In the chat, and that's in the All Aboard Ohio link in the chat there that was discussed. So I do know that there are still some questions, and we'll hang around for a couple minutes here to address those. I guess I could turn my camera back on to address those, but I do want to clarify and formally close this meeting and give a big thank you to Ken for the wonderful presentation. And John Esterly also worked a lot on putting together the information in that presentation. Wasn't able to join us today, but really appreciate both of their efforts in putting it together, and Ken's efforts and knowledge in delivering that content. Thank you all very much for your participation. We hope to see a lot of you, especially those of you in Northeast Ohio, on the CVSR on October 11th. If you're able, this coming next weekend, there is the Rally for Amtrak. So both Cleveland and Cincinnati will have Rally for Amtrak. Now that's not an All Aboard Ohio event, but I do plan to go to the one in Cleveland to show support for passenger rail in Ohio. And we thank you very much for your time, and we look forward to your continued participation. So please go to the All Aboard Ohio webpage and sign up to be a basic free member and get on our mailing list. We appreciate your time and your support.
Thank you, Brian.
Thanks, Ken. Thanks, Lisa.
Yeah, and we're also on social media. So check us out. We started a TikTok page recently that's been doing really well. Our Instagram is doing really well, but we are all on all platforms, and Ryan and the social media team have been doing a fantastic job. So feel free to show them some love and follow there and engage there. And if you post, tag us. But social media is a great tool to stay in touch as well.